The machinery towering over the officers in this photograph is the Schwerer Gustav. Fully assembled, this weapon weighed nearly 1,350 tons in combat. No other piece of mobile artillery even comes close. Engineering a machine of this size required massive amounts of specialized steel and manpower. The German military only built it to solve a specific strategic problem they considered impossible to overcome with standard firepower. In 1934, the French military was nearing completion of the Maginot Line. This was an extensive network of underground forts and heavily armored turrets that formed the strongest defensive fortification on Earth at the time. The German Army High Command needed a way to break through it. They issued a strict, impossible directive: design a weapon capable of punching through 7 meters of reinforced concrete, and do it from a distance that kept the guns safely out of range of French return fire. This diagram illustrates the math calculated by Krupp engineer Erich Müller. He determined that to achieve that level of destruction, you would need a projectile 80 centimeters in diameter, fired out of a barrel 30 meters long. Once you build a barrel this massive, the weapon's total weight surpasses 1,000 tons. You cannot use a standard truck or a standard tank tread. It required massive railway tracks. To defeat a static, immobile wall of concrete, the military committed to engineering a siege weapon so enormous that it was practically immobile itself. During a visit to the Krupp factory in Essen in March 1936, Adolf Hitler toured the facilities and personally inquired about building this giant gun. Though he made no definite commitment, his interest immediately launched the design and fabrication process. The initial timeline called for the gun to be ready by early 1940, but forging massive pieces of steel of this exact size and tolerance created massive technical complications, causing Krupp to miss their deadline completely. The finalized 1,350-ton assembly was simply too massive for any standard European rail lines. The gun would simply crush normal tracks beneath its own weight. Maintaining the Gustav meant deploying thousands of personnel and building a localized infrastructure from scratch. It was an industrial operation that had outgrown the definition of a weapon. Twin sets of parallel tracks supported the gun's extreme weight across 80 individual wheels. The rigid barrel could tilt vertically, but could not pivot side to side. To aim horizontally, the crew built a giant curved section of railway, moving the entire 1,300-ton chassis along the arc. Firing a single shell meant surveying the terrain, tearing up the ground, and laying down miles of specialized rail. The crew literally had to rebuild the local geography before they could even load the weapon. The Battle of France began in May 1940. Because of all those manufacturing delays, the Gustav was still sitting in a testing facility. Without waiting for the giant gun, the Wehrmacht offensive rapidly bypassed Belgium. This maneuver warfare outflanked the Maginot Line, rendering the massive French forts irrelevant. The gun eventually saw action during the invasion of the Soviet Union. At the Siege of Sevastopol, it fired high-explosive shells that successfully penetrated 98 feet below sea level to obliterate an underwater munitions depot. The destructive force was exactly what Krupp engineers had calculated. But it required thousands of men and several weeks just to build the tracks and assemble the gun in Crimea. By the time this massive weapon finally arrived and set up to fire, modern mechanized warfare was already shifting away from static, months-long sieges. The German army later moved the weapon toward Leningrad and briefly planned to deploy it during the Warsaw Uprising. In both instances, the physical front lines shifted faster than the crew could deploy the weapon. By the spring of 1945, with the Red Army advancing rapidly, the German military blew up the Schwerer Gustav themselves in order to keep it from falling into Soviet hands. The gun delivered every bit of the destructive power the High Command had requested, but in a war defined by rapid movement, 1,300 tons of steel couldn't move fast enough to actually reach the fight.